All right, so welcome back. Hope you had a good break. We want to get back to this to make sure you get your money's worth for today. Because nitrogen. Now, what I really want with this session is that we have a discussion about nitrogen management in general, the direction and approach to nitrogen management, and have an appreciation for the trajectory or trend that we're going through here in terms of basically a shift in our thinking of nitrogen. Because, and you're aware of this, environmental issues are becoming more and more of an issue, and they're becoming more mainstream. It used to be the issue of select groups, right? But now every farmer is thinking about environmental aspects of their production system. And the buyers of your products are thinking about that in terms of the processor, the food companies, and then also the consumers. And as we move forward, you can see already we're having a change or a shift in how our economic, I'm not sure what you call it, economic structure is going, and it's really around energy, right? And energy and carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. I don't want to frighten you. I don't want to cause you to stand up and walk out of here. It's okay. As Ryan and I were talking about yesterday, I'm not a the sky is falling kind of guy. I'm more like, hey, things are really looking up. We have opportunities, and we can improve our efficiency. We can improve our profitability. That's what we're about here. Okay? Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to come up here and try to chain myself to a tree outside. Okay. So let's get into this. Nitrous oxide. This is going to be a big topic going forward. It is a topic today. What is it? It's a gas. It's been around a long time, and makes cars go faster. It helps you go to the dentist, knock you out. It's called laughing gas. It can be a recreational drug. I was just reading this morning how people that use nitrous oxide as a laughing gas as a drug, they get permanent spinal cord damage. It's like really shocking. I didn't realize this, but people are coming to them and saying, I can't walk really anymore. I can't feel my toes. I can't feel my fingers. And they don't tell them that they use this gas a lot. Okay, so I know none of you are probably doing this.
Not that we're going to admit.
But you are doing this, unless you're lactose intolerant. And that's whipped cream. What's the connection between whipped cream and nitrous oxide? It's what makes the whip, is N2O, okay? It makes the bubblies. Nitrogen gas, CO2, won't give you whipped cream, the texture and the feel and stuff like that. Okay. Anyway, what am I talking? I'm doing this just to make it a little bit more fun. Okay, we're not just talking about doom and gloom and stuff like that. Okay. Now this is way more fun. The nitrogen side. Okay, we add fertilizer. In this case, urea 4600 into soil. The action of microbes, which are very important here, and it's very natural, convert the urea to ammonium. Then the ammonium gets converted to nitrate. And our crops take up majority of the nitrogen they take up as nitrate in the water that makes it to the roots. Okay? We need this to happen for nutrition. But as nature is phenomenal, and because this is biological in soil, and you know soil is the most wonderful and diverse and complex environment there is that we know of in the universe, some critters will do something different here. Okay? They're going to take it to advantage. And one thing that happens is we can have emission of gas, of nitrous oxide, in this process of ammonium being transformed to nitrate by bacteria, called nitrification is the process. We can have some N2O emitted. We can also have N2O emitted in denitrification, where nitrate in the soil is, under wet soil conditions, can be reduced or transformed to nitrous oxide. We call this direct losses, okay, direct losses. And the amount that was lost on your fields, your potato fields, probably about 3 pounds of nitrogen a year as N2O. And you're probably saying, is why the hell is this guy talking to me about 3 pounds of nitrogen? Right? It's because the 3 pounds of nitrogen as N2O means a lot for warming of the atmosphere. And I'll talk a bit more about this. And it's also because the N2O that is emitted to the atmosphere, most of it comes from soils, agricultural soils, crop soils. Okay? So that's why we're talking about it today. But let's contrast that with other losses of nitrogen, which have environmental consequences, but they're way more, let's call it, more of interest to you from an economic standpoint. Okay? And one of them is volatilization. So if we take that same urea and we add it to the surface of soil, and it stays there, a portion of that can come off as ammonia to the atmosphere. Or if we add a swine slurry or a dairy slurry and leave it at the surface, a portion of that can come off as ammonia to the atmosphere. Now, if we, in those cases where the nitrogen is at the surface, and it has to be urea or liquid manure, we can lose as much as 20, even 30% of the nitrogen to the atmosphere's ammonia. Now that's a big deal, right? In terms of money, of fertilizer money gone, right? There's also the environmental, that ammonia in the upper atmosphere. So think about, you know where those Chinese balloons are? Way up there? Some of that ammonia gets converted over to N2O by ultraviolet light and lightning and various things like that. So this is what we refer to as an indirect source of N2O. Indirect, okay? Because indirect because it's via ammonia first. So it's an economic concern if you leave your nitrogen at the surface, and it's also an environmental concern for the N2O. And there's another one here that you know very well, and that is leaching, where this nitrate in soil, and I'm going to refer to this nitrate that leaches as loitering nitrogen. So generally nitrogen that's kicking around and not being taken up by a plant. If we have water percolation to the soil, which happens here a lot because you have more water than, more rainfall, or more water input than that leaves via evapotranspiration. So it's going to go down. Or, as we were hearing this morning, if you have compaction and various things, it can go, and no plant cover, and go straight off the surface, right? But what goes through the soil is nitrate leaching, and that can be up to, I don't know, I put 40% here of nitrogen. You know, it could be, obviously it can be less and even higher than that. That's a big economic concern. Now, let's just show you how important this process is. In my province, my farmers soil sample in the fall, before freeze up, get a soil test analysis, and then they have all winter to plan what they want to do the next year in terms of nitrogen rates and so forth. They use the fall numbers at planting as the credit, the nitrogen credit. What do? Do you sample in the fall for nitrate and use that number as a credit for the next year? No. Do you use a spring nitrogen test as a credit for that year? You can't even trust a spring test because it's going to be gone. The nitrate's going to be gone. That's how important this is here. It's amazing. Right? All right. Is this an environmental concern? Well, if you drink the water, groundwater, it's a concern, right? It's in high levels. But also, unfortunately, some of this nitrate gets turned into nitrous oxide, that N2O gas, that greenhouse gas. Okay? Somewhere bacteria in the water, either in the groundwater, in a creek, wherever in there, will produce N2O from the nitrate. Okay? And again, that's an indirect source of N2O. You with me? So this is an economic issue, I think, right? Because whatever's nitrogen is left over from your crop, cropping, your potato crop or other crops, sayonara, bye-bye. You're not seeing it for your next year's crop. Right? Let's put things into perspective. The reason why N2O is concern for greenhouse gases is that it's 300 times more powerful for warming than the molecule of carbon dioxide. Okay? So a little bit of N2O is like having a lot more CO2. And the other, I'll get to the other one in a bit. But the leaching and ammonia volatilization are agronomic and environmental importance. And that direct N2O emissions is environmental. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. The way I like to pose it to growers is that, hey, just in general, let me reduce my nitrogen losses. Because I'm going to benefit agronomically in terms of it's not dollars of fertilizer, nitrogen going to the environment. Okay? And if you concentrate on that, you will go a long way to reducing the environmental impact. Okay? So I'd say this one you can understand. You can understand this one. I'd say focus on that one, and this will come with it. Okay? You can feel good about yourself. Okay? You can tell people that I'm doing this for my own benefit. I'm not a tree hugger. Okay? But you are actually helping them. So let's look at PEI. These are the emissions of greenhouse gases from the island by different economic sectors. This is transportation. These are different years. This is 2020. Let's look at this one. This is transportation. This is the biggest bar. So it's diesel and gasoline. The second is agriculture in purple in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's the second biggest emitter of greenhouse gases is agriculture here. So for PEI, to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, where's the province going to look? One is reduction in transportation, so let's say electric vehicles or other things. Agriculture's on there as well. And from fertilizer use, reducing N2O emissions is going to be a big one. Okay. Let's look into agriculture alone and see where those greenhouse gases are coming from. In red here is from soils, where I've put the direct and the indirect greenhouse gas emissions, and this is all nitrous oxide, N2O. We add these together, that's 160 kilotons per year from PEI, from the soils. The next closest one is enteric fermentation, so that's burps from dairy and beef cattle and sheep at 110. There's manure. You can have methane from manure, particularly from liquid storages, but we also have N2O being released from manure. This is more from stockpiled and composted manure, solid manures. Okay? So you can see N2O is a big player here, producing well more than 50% of the greenhouse gases from agriculture.
What do you mean direct and indirect when you talk about solar?
Okay, so the direct is we add fertilizer, we get emissions of N2O directly to the atmosphere from the transformation of the bacteria. The indirect is that ammonia volatilization and the nitrate leaching that eventually produces some N2O that goes to the environment. So it's kind of like certain, there's an intermediate, either ammonia or the nitrate, right? So this is the picture. Now, some of you might say, well, PI, if I was to show you the emissions from PI compared to the other provinces, they're non-existent, right, compared to Ontario. So many more people and activity in Ontario, right? But our approach is, it's the Canadian approach, like everybody's got to hurt a little bit. Everybody's got to contribute. If you want to put in this positive spin, everybody's got to contribute a little bit, right? So we're all being asked, regardless of, to contribute. Every sector and every place, every province, and so forth. At the moment, what is that commitment for reduction? Do you know? Do we have a commitment to reduction? What's that?
1/3 by 2030.
1/3 of what?
Of emissions.
Oh, good. You said emissions. I'm happy. Because some people will say 1/3 of fertilizer use, and it's not. It's 1/3 of nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer use, not the using 1/3 less fertilizer. That's not the goal.
I guess you partly answered the question there. What I was going to ask. So if you cut back your nitrogen use by 10 or 20%, how would it affect that number? I guess you just answered it.
Yeah, if you let's say we cut back 10% on the nitrogen rate, you cut 10% your emissions. We'll talk a bit more about that. Because it's not, like we just can't go out to you and say, hey, cut your fertilizer rate by 30%. Like that's irresponsible of us saying that without data to back that up in the long term that you're going to be okay profitability-wise with yield and everything, right? So we're going to show you some data of some real means to reduce those emissions without hurting your profits. I'm also going to get you to think about how to ensure to not reduce your profits. Okay? And that's going to be a key message coming out of here, is having us think about moving forward, how do we work so that if we change our practices, and yeah, they may cost us more money, those practices. We don't want to be chipping away at profits, because that doesn't help anybody, right? How do we do this work? The majority of our work is done very laboriously, where we do field trials with potatoes. We slap these boxes on the fields, in the hills and in the furrows, and then the students will come out and place lids on those for 30 minutes, and then they'll suck gas over a period of 30 minutes from the boxes, and then we analyze them in the laboratory for nitrous oxide with instruments. So it's field-based studies. We can't do this work in the lab. The numbers will be meaningless for the non-emissions. We have to study in situ in the field. And I like to do this as much as possible in farm fields, like commercial farm fields. Let's look at some of the results here. And this will give you an idea of when the emissions occur of N2O. So on the top here, 2 different years, 2009, 2010, potato fields, russet Burbank planted in Manitoba. It's under irrigation for agriculture, production for processing potato Burbank. We would have fertilized here, and in this case it's all at planting, fertilization, and then there's a period of time nothing's going on in terms of N2O emissions. The symbols are at 0. Nothing's going on. Nothing's been emitted. And then we get the spike. What do you think happened to cause this spike in emissions? It's related, temperatures are swinging upwards, yes, but
Fertigation? Are they fertig?
it's close. Nature's irrigation. Rained. It rained. And that gets the bacteria all happy, and they start chugging on that nitrogen, and they start nitrifying it, and we get N2O emissions. But it's a short period of time. It's all nitrified over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. It's now all is nitrate. And boom, nothing else happens later. Even if we get rains, because we don't have fresh nitrogen fertilizer to be transformed, to be emitted. Okay? All the actions on the hills in this year. Nothing in the furrow. Let's go to the next year. A lot less here. Actually, the rains happened much later. You get that little spike later. In the furrows, we're getting spikes early on and over here as well. We had some, in 2010 it was a lot wetter, and the furrows pooled and ponded. And the nitrogen was kind of moved from the hills into the furrows, actually. Is moved with the water, right? It kind of shows you what's going on here. Where the action is. Sometimes it's the hills, in a dry area. In a very wet year, it's the furrows. It tells you that the N2O emission is only happening when the nitrogen is transforming to nitrate. Okay? So, that's what's happened now in your system. You might be putting your fertilizer all on at planting. Some of you might be in a conventional hilling where you might have some top up some nitrogen at hilling, right? Now let's go to that situation. Oh, well, before we do that, let's remind ourselves. This is part of moving forward. And well, it's part of the here and now and part of moving forward in terms of using a 4R management approach to nutrient management. I know you all know about this, right? Source, timing, placement. Right, thank you. And we can use this to say, okay, these are my conditions out there, this is my implements, this is what I have on hand, this is my targets for yield, this is my target crop, and come up with a mixture of these four to reduce emissions and reduce nitrogen losses, okay? You know, we need one more here. Well, some people always argue, we should put rotation here. Okay, you can put rotation out. But I think the biggest one we need to put here is an E, the E word. What is that E word? The right E.
Economics.
Economics, right, the right economics. So, sir, you're asking about what happens if I reduce my rate. Well, this is increasing rate of nitrogen to potato, and this is increasing N2O emissions. 2 different years, and we can see that it's quite consistent, right? The more nitrogen fertilizer we put on, the more N2O emissions. This is in Manitoba. It's going to be the same situation here. And David Burton, a colleague from Dalhousie University, has similar results for. I'm going to show some of that actually for PI as well. So yeah, so we want to reduce N2O emissions. Let's drop our rates by 30%. But again, I would say that would be irresponsible. We can't just say that without having data, okay? And I know in Manitoba, we probably can't do that. I know we can't do that for most field crops, and I know we probably can't do that with potato, okay? In PEI, I'm going to tell you that your conditions are a little bit more challenging than mine for 2 reasons. One, we have the loss with water, with leaching. Okay? I can count on the fertilizer left over from the previous year as a credit and this and that. It simplifies things for me. For you though, you got to pretend that you got to assume there's a clean slate. every year, every planting season. The second issue is I just forgot what the second issue was. Let me get back to let me think about this.
Mineralized then?
Yes, thank you very much. The fact that I'm getting old. This is the third time we've done this, right?
That's why I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. Mineralization. You have a tremendous amount of mineralization that is extremely evident here in nitrate levels, particularly at the end of the growing season, after the crop is harvested. Okay. So, it's not clear cut saying, is that nitrogen that's mineralized during the season, is it available to your crop? Does it happen in time when your crop needs to take it up, or does it happen after, when it's bulking and doing other things that it's really translocating within the plant the nitrogen and it's not looking to the roots for new stuff, right? So it's more complex. But we can live through this, we can work through this, okay?
So what are so why is that different in Manitoba, the mineralization? Is it the soil type, because it's clay, or something else?
We have a longer winter. Our winter basically goes from the last week of October to the middle of April, where there's not much going on. Here, you can still have mineralization occurring over the winter if you don't get the frost in the soil. Okay? So you have this extra period of stuff happening in terms of residue decomposition, microbes dying, the release of nitrogen from the microbes. Okay? So that's one aspect.
We also get twice as much water as you guys do.
Twice as much water. Another thing I was thinking about, your soil. What are your soil temperatures come June? Still cool on the cool side?
20 degrees, 18 to 20 degrees a lot of the time.
It's not that. Our soils will heat up pretty fast. Oh, the other thing is, in my neck of the woods, the summer is a dry spell, usually. July and August, we have a deficit of moisture, the soil's dry now. We need the roots to be down low to extract, if it's potato, we're irrigating actually. So in general, what ends up happening is we're not getting as much mineralization late in the season because our soils are dry and the microbes have to slow down. Okay. Whereas here, they're still going gangbusters. Temperature's getting higher and there's moisture still. So that your bugs are chugging away still. My guys kind of go on, they kind of take it easy a bit because there's not much water around. So that's a big factor. Other questions? I'm boring you? A little bit. All right. Let's look at some possible opportunities here and solutions to reduce losses and improve our nitrogen use efficiency. Enhanced efficiency fertilizers. We're really going to talk about two groups here. What are called stabilizers and controlled products, controlled release products. You're familiar with this stuff. The stabilizers are inhibitors that are added to the nitrogen, and they slow the effect of microbes in transforming the nitrogen. One group is called urease inhibitors that prevent urea from being broken down to ammonia. Okay, let's think of it as ammonia. Those are urease inhibitors. The second are nitrification inhibitors, and they, guess what, slow down nitrification, which is what? Ammonia to nitrate, that conversion in soil. And the third of that grouping of the stabilizers is the double inhibitors, and they have both together. Okay, urease inhibitor and nitrification inhibitor. The second group we'll mention today is the polymer-coated, or sometimes people call it PCU, polymer-coated urea. And these are controlled release because they release the nitrogen. The nitrogen will bleed out of the granule through the plastic as the soil warms and if the soil is wet. Okay? Then it can bleed through the plastic. Because the plastic has little pores or holes in it. Examples of products out there for the stabilizer. For urease inhibitor, you might be familiar with agrotine. Who's heard of agrotine? For nitrification inhibitor, it's a little bit more tricky because there are products on the market, but they're not as common just to have the single nitrification inhibitor. N-Serve was an old one with anhydrous ammonia. Entrench is a new formulation of that for urea by Corteva. And there's some smaller companies. But the double inhibitor, you're probably familiar with Super U, right? It has both. So those are the big ones like Super U and agrotine. If you use liquid, you might use agrotine plus.
Do you guys sell any of the just nitrification inhibitors? Do you know? No.
No. This one puzzles me because this is the product that I would want to buy. I would want to buy a nitrification inhibitor for placing fertilizer below ground. Where my fertilizer is below ground, I'd want one of these. If I'm placing my urea fertilizer at the surface, I'd want one of these. I don't know where this fits in terms of improving things.
Wouldn't the double be better?
What, and you're right, because there's two. Two's got to be better than one.
Yeah.
In many situations, two is better than one. But in this case, for example, one product is supposed to prevent the ammonia from being driven off, and the other product is supposed to be preventing N2O from being driven off, right? Well, what ends up happening is you can have the effect of the nitrification inhibitor preventing ammonia to go to nitrate. So you have more ammonia around, and even though you have an inhibitor to prevent ammonia from leaving the soil, you still have more of it around, and you get more off. Okay? So let's say we look at ammonia volatilization. This works really good to prevent it, and this works 50% as good. And it's because the nitrification inhibitor is causing a problem. It's backing up the system, causing more of it to be released.
But if that's below the soil, is that really a worry?
It's not if
Okay.
it's below soil.
Yeah.
But from my standpoint is you've wasted the money on the urease inhibitor component. You don't need it. But economic-wise for the companies, like it's easy for Coke to make Super U, put both chemicals together and then form the granule. Okay. It's just easy that way, right? And it's super simple. So you're going to see a bit more movement on the market here for products availability. Okay. Especially, you know, like here's Taurus Ag does the ARM stuff. Neon is from what's the company? Not Bio. Oh, no Bioactive. Shoot, something like that. Is that who else in here? Well, the Coke products. Coke is replacing their agrotane is being replaced by Anvil. Why? Because the patent, everybody can make agrotane, and that's what these other products are. And so they need to come up with a new patent, and they change the agrotane just slightly, and they can patent it, and so it's a different little product up here, Anvil. And they've done the same thing with nitrification inhibitors, where they've created Centuro. And then here, Super U, it will eventually be replaced by, Agrotane Plus, which was the liquid additive for nitrification and urease inhibitor, has been replaced by Tribune. Because they want to separate themselves. Because these other things here are knockoffs of Agrotane Plus. So what happens is you have the big players, like Coke, and Corteva do some innovation, and then you have the
Generic guys.
generic, you know, what do they call it? You do deconstruction of a product and you make the same thing.
Before you go too far on that,
Yeah.
and maybe this is a question to Bernadette or Ryan or whomever, like even the off-CAF funding, I keep on seem to be getting pushed towards Super U.
Yeah.
And from a couple different spots. But then you're saying, why would you bother going to Super U? Any comments there?
I have a lot of comments there. So I've been dealing with the feds a lot on this. So the Fertilizer Canada, the different organizations. The Federation here hasn't contacted me, but the other groups have across Canada, because under off-CAF, you can get money for this. You can get money for either of these alone.
You can get money here for a urease inhibitor if it's surface applied.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that's good. So I've been struggling on two fronts, trying to get nitrification inhibitors under the off-CAF. I've sent letters, I've provided research data and so forth, and then Canada, or Environment Canada has just basically said, leave us alone. We've established the program, we just want to let it ride for a bit, and then we'll think about making changes. The other one was, and this one we were successful in, and that was with ESN, the polymer coated. Initially they said no, it wouldn't be covered because ESN in Eastern Canada wasn't very clear that it would reduce nitrous oxide emissions. But in Western Canada, with my data, it definitely does reduce emissions. And so we got ESN and polymer coateds to be okay in Western Canada. So they did respond to that one, but they're not budging on this one yet. So I don't have a rational reason for you, answer to you on that.
The answer is government.
What's that?
The answer is government.
So at the end of the day, which one of those three would you recommend in a potato rotation?
It depends.
It's always the answer, isn't it?
It's horrible, isn't it? We just want
So that's a fine answer, as long as you qualify.
So, you tell me, where do we want to use a urease inhibitor? Where?
Surface
Where's-
applied.
Good service supply,
Surface applied. What type of product? What type of fertilizer?
urea.
Yeah, you don't need me here. You don't need me. All right.
We just like
Ni-
weird from
ni-
horses now. Yeah.
Nitrification inhibitor
Applied in soil.
in soil. And what products?
Urea.
Urea, nitrates.
No. Not nitrates. Nitrates won't produce N2O for you.
Or ammonia.
Yes.
Or
So, ammonium sulfate, UAN, urea. The nitrification inhibitor is good for subsurface placement. Okay. Do not use a nitrification inhibitor alone at the soil surface. You're just going to ask for ammonia volatilization. So, below ground, above ground, and it stays above ground. Okay. I guess this one here is not going to harm you putting this in the soil. It's going to do just as good as this one here.
Say that again. So are you suggesting if you have a urease inhibitor, you can just leave it on the soil surface?
If you have urea,
Yeah.
that's the objective of, that's why it's marketed for.
So you
So
do
that'd be
not
like
want to incorporate it?
top dress and grain where you're just gonna leave it sitting there, right?
Okay, let's back up, because we're talking about best management practices. What's the best management practice for nitrogen placement? Where do you want to put the nitrogen for best management practices?
In the ground.
In the ground, exactly. Are there situations where you have no choice but to leave it on the surface? Yes. That's what we're talking about here. Those situations where, because we want to be flexible here, we don't want to handcuff you. You know, you have forage out there. Am I going to tell you to band it or incorporate in a forage? No, it's not going to work. Or you're doing a rescue operation, I don't know if you have a winter weed or something and trying to rescue in the springtime.
We use it for top dressing, like we're gonna top dress urea on corn at, you know, at V4, V5,
Oh,
and
that early?
and you wanna put on some urea, you know, that sort of thing. Or you're putting it on alfalfa to get a little boost or something like that, so.
Yeah. So, you know, we would say to Ryan, well, think about investing in better an injector or a side dressing situation in time with the corn. But there, you know, you don't have that right now. So when we look at the 4 R's, it's not like saying thou shall only do this. That's not that's the idea. It's like saying under these conditions that I have, this is my best option economically, environmentally, and agronomically. Okay. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, yeah.
Good. I like that discussion. I like the discussion a lot. Let's look more at N2O from studies. And here we're looking at, this is potato. Here's the emissions from urea added at planting. And you can see it rained and there's this big spike here. The polymer coated ESN, not as high emissions and drags on a little bit later, which makes sense because it's controlled release. It's a bit of a delayed release. Okay. Still had lower emissions than the urea alone. Now let's split the urea. So we have some at planting and some at hilling. And you might call that a conventional system. We don't have that big spike because we're not putting a big boost on, a big shot at one time. Okay. And we're actually producing less N2O than in the situation where it's all going on at planting.
And that's, comes back to our initial question. We're now putting our additional nitrogen on before planting when we have hillers in the back of the planter.
Yep.
And it's such a long period before those plants actually need that additional nitrogen, especially long season.
What should we do?
Those inhibitors, nitrification or double inhibitors.
Yeah, we want to use something with a nitrification inhibitor.
Or
Because-
ESN or one of those.
Or ESN, yeah. ESN or pure
Yield.
Pure yield. I want to say pure coat. Pure coat was one of the granddaddy old products for polymer coated. Why? Because it's a situation that you just put out there. It's a perfect case of loitering nitrogen risk. We put it on at planting or before planting, and we have a period of time that where the plant is, you know, it's emerging, and we got weeks there and not much nitrogen uptake. But the bugs are working, they're producing nitrate from the fertilizer, from the nitrogen, from the urea, let's say we put in. And then you can get rains and the nitrate's there, it's loitering, and go down. So we can lose a portion of it. Now what happens if we use a nitrification inhibitor at planting? You're going to get a protection of about 2 to 3 weeks maybe of not having as much loitering nitrate being produced over that time period. So if it rains over that 2 to 3 week window to get lots of leaching, you're keeping the nitrogen in ammonium form that can stick to the soil. Okay? You're reducing that risk. If it's a polymer coated, it hasn't bled out of the granule yet. So it's still in the granule. Again, we don't have the loitering nitrate to move, so we're protecting ourselves for that. When's planting here, generally?
Late May?
Mid-May,
Late-
late May.
Okay, let's say mid to late May. You're protecting yourself into the 3rd week, 4th week of June for that period of time in terms of lowering your leaching losses from your fertilizer nitrogen. Does that make sense, Ryan?
And then after that, we don't tend to get as many big rains.
Okay.
And we're reducing the rate then, presumably, as well?
Now let's talk about that in a bit.
Okay.
I get the sense that I'm going too slow for you guys. We can skip these, are just summaries and stuff like that. just to show you the power, the power of the nitrification inhibitors, okay? This is Super U. This is a nitrification inhibitor alone in trench. And this is emissions of N2O, and they're the same. This is in wheat, spring wheat, okay? There's nothing, the urease inhibitor does not reduce N2O emissions at all, okay? This is subsurface placed fertilizer, okay, urea, side bedding. Of the practices that we've looked at in Manitoba in my career, this is a summary of them. The best practice to reduce nitrous oxide emissions is, not surprisingly, nitrogen fixing legumes. That's alfalfa, faba bean, soybean, that's included in this data set, okay? It would also include peas, likely if I had grown peas. What's up there? Well, the fertilizer is coming from the plant and the bacteria and its roots and the nodules, right? It's a reduction of 61% of N2O. Actually, that is almost all reduction of N2O that potentially could have come from fertilizer. Because even if we don't add fertilizer to soil, nitrogen fertilizer, we still get N2O as background from the natural nitrogen cycle. So in effect, that is basically almost 100% reduction of fertilizer nitrogen emissions. Okay? We're not adding any fertilizer. The next best approach is split application. So that would be your conventional system of nitrogen application. And this data set here, these 13 site years or trials, would have potato, canola, and corn. We've tried it in all those three crops. Corn is fairly conventional, as Ryan does, and obviously potato. I am a little bit concerned, and this I've learned this from this trip here, in that I didn't realize going to one pass system of fertilizing and hilling and planting was becoming more and more popular here. To me, that is going in the wrong direction for reducing N2O emissions.
You know, we're saving the pass with the tractor.
Okay, we're saving there, but the N2O is going to give you a lot more CO2, unfortunately.
But it's still two different sources of nitrogen. Usually in the planter, it's a calcium ion nitrate, and then usually a pre-plant of some urea base before planting.
Okay.
It's the same urea based thing would just be put on 2 weeks later at a hilling. Just putting it forward just before planting.
Yep.
2 weeks later.
So
would that be much?
I think we would want to think about using a nitrification inhibitor for that urea pre-plant.
And yeah.
I wouldn't worry much about the can,
No.
because it's only half of it is ammonia,
Right.
and you're not going to get as much benefit from an inhibitor going to can as urea. I'd put the investment on the urea.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess so I'm getting at it, wasn't it? When we talked about all applied earlier, it's not one source.
Yes, it
But
is.
it's
Okay.
two different.
Right, but the timing is more upfront and early.
Yeah.
You get more loitering.
Yeah.
I know you use can, and it's because of you get shipments overseas coming into ports in Atlantic Canada. In the long run, we probably would be better off using urea than can.
Okay. But can you use the urea in a planter mix to go down with the seed? I guess that's a question. No. It's a new.
So you can go with bands, like you can have 2 bands on the side of the seed piece, or put it on just ahead, and then as you form that hill, it gets put in.
What is the nitrogen source this year in your planter mixes?
It'll be ammonium sulfate, can, or Axan.
Oh, actually.
Yeah.
Who do you work with?
Cavendish.
Cavendish, okay, cool. So, and the access to CAN is going to be globally,
It's tight, we can that we have is what we had from last year, so we couldn't, so the majority for us will be Axan, yeah.
and it's still coming by ship?
Yeah. Mhm.
Your different nitrogen products, right?
Yeah.
So it's really weird with nitrogen. We produce fertilizer nitrogen, tons of it in Western Canada, which is produced for Western Canada and it's shipped to the United States. So the trade is north-south. It doesn't move that much this way. It costs way more money to ship by train fertilizer from Alberta to here than it is to load a ocean-going vessel in China or Russia and send it here. It's you kind of think, got to be cheaper by train. No, it's not. It's weird, huh?
Mm-hmm.
It's just economics. It's just trade, transportation economics. And so anyway, I think in the long run, it would be better if we could be moving towards urea here. It would keep a little bit of that nitrate to be less loitering, okay? So, and that's going to happen. You're going to see a shift in time, I believe, because the fertilizer products, we're better off making fertilizer products in Canada than buying overseas, because our plants, our fertilizer manufacturing plants are more modern, and they're using natural gas, and they're going to be starting to do recapturing of CO2.
We don't have to worry about when people go to war.
And then you don't have to worry if they're using petroleum, coal, weird sources around the world, right? So in time, it probably will happen. Like if the government wanted to do something, they would kind of say, hey, let's help out get Canadian product to the east.
We have about 10, 15 minutes.
Sorry,
No problem.
Before you change the slide, sorry, Dave.
I'm having fun.
So yeah, in terms of growing potatoes, supporting potato growers, so a split end application has the largest nitrous oxide reduction of any of those practices.
And nitrification inhibitors. Nitrification inhibitors as well.
Yeah, but yeah, so split end, so that involves just applying urea before killing?
Yep. Or at hill.
At hill, yeah.
And if you use nitrification inhibitors, that will drop it down.
Mhm.
Pretend you didn't see this ESN line,
Why?
because you have too much moisture here in the summer,
Okay.
and you can still have N2O coming off from the release of the ESN. Please ignore this. Got me? Brian, you're gonna make sure you emphasize that down the road with people, right? Because I don't want you guys to use this and say, hey, this is what we can do in Atlantic Canada and on the island. PCU, just forget about that. For N2O reduction, okay? Not in terms of leaching and that yes, it's good, okay? I wish it wasn't so complicated, okay, but it is. You know, there's a message here with a lot of this work when we look at these trials with different products and so forth. We don't find in Manitoba, with potato, but also with other crops, a yield boost. Okay, and there's some data in here, even from David Burton with potatoes here on the island with different practices. Not a yield boost using the 4 Rs. However, guess what we're doing? We're not changing the rate of nitrogen. We're using basically the rate of nitrogen that we would usually use as the status quo practice, right? Which takes into account what? Our nitrogen losses, right? We then impose, as researchers, treatments that are designed to reduce losses, but we keep our rate the same because we're doorknobs and we have to keep things the same as scientists, right? Oh, don't change the rate and the practice at the same time. We don't know what's going on, right? We can't tease it apart. So what ends up happening is you have a new practice that has less losses, but you kept the rate the same, and you don't see a yield increase. And it's because our rate has already accounted that risk of nitrogen loss into it. What we are thinking about now, and David is thinking about this and doing it as well, is that say, hey, I changed my practice to reduce my risk of loss. Should I not now reevaluate my nitrogen rate? Okay, that's what I want you to think about. I'm not going to tell you to reevaluate it by reducing it 30% or 50%. I'm not going to say that to you. I'm going to say be smart about it. Test it in your fields. If you want to do something drastic, try 30% reduction as a strip in your field. See what happens. But I'm going to say, hey, and I can probably say this without having you come back and say, you just lost me a lot of money. I'm going to say, figure out the cost of the practice that you've just newly imposed and see how much fertilizer that would be equivalent to in dollars, and reduce the rate by that. At least you're breaking even on your profits. Okay, you've paid for the new practice. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by that. Okay. So PEI situation here from David Bergen and Dalhousie. Increasing organic matter on the island, increasing nitrogen release from soil or mineralization. Does it make sense? You know, it's not, people think, oh, it's coming from the organic matter. You know what? It's not really coming from organic, it's coming from the bacteria and the fungi that are living on the organic matter. That's where that nitrogen's coming from, okay? Here's David, here's the marketable yield with reducing fertilizer by 25% or increasing it by 25% based compared to standard practice in the middle. Not much of a super huge difference. At one site, yes. Okay. I'm not going to advocate drop it by 25% and most of you should be okay. I'm not going to say that to you. Okay. Because I'm concerned that a lot of trials like this are one-offs. We reduce the fertilizer by 25% in 1 year, and we look at the yield results. Well, what would happen if you do this over 10 years, shorting nitrogen? We have a farmer, he's a grain farmer in Manitoba, and he did exactly that. By 30%, he shorted his grain oilseed rotation in strips. And what did he find was that for the first 3 years, he was okay. The yields were equivalent between the standard rate and the 30% rate for the first 3 years. And then after 3 years, to all the way up to now, which is 10 years, the yields have been declining. So what I think he had done was he depleted the storage bank in the microbes. And he's not getting mineralization occurring over time. Okay? So I want you just to be careful with that. And I want you going out there and reducing by 25–30% and thinking that you can just do that. Okay? Look at the residual nitrate now in soil after, I'm presuming this is after potato year.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, 5 different fields. Let's look at the average here. The standard practice is the highest, but equivalent to 25% more. We can definitely see that having the higher nitrogen, there was more nitrate, but we can't actually say that there's more nitrate residual with that highest N rate. And I think this shows the complexity of your system here, particularly with your moisture and rain, and in terms of there's more release of nitrogen over the season with the greater nitrogen fertilizer rates, but it is it depends on the rain, okay, how much is going to be left over. But I can tell you this, having greater than 80, what's going to be about 70 pounds nitrogen left over in that field after potato harvest, that's 70 pounds of nitrate N that's gone. Right? You can't count on it the next year.
So why is the on the grower standard practice minus 50% residual still so high?
This one?
On the gray one.
That one? Yeah. Yeah, this is plus 25%. This is the minus 25.
Okay, sorry about that. I couldn't
No, that's
see right
okay.
from here.
Well, let's put it, why is this one still so low? Well, it's because of the mineralization of nitrogen that's happened from organic matter and the microbes that the plant doesn't need to take up because it's bulking and things like that, okay? So you're, and they're gonna give you, I'm gonna back this up in a bit. Let's keep going with total nitrogen rate over that trial and then the tuber yield. No difference between 100 and 200 pounds of NN on marketable yield.
Well, this might be back to the last slide, but there was some conversation over some of the groundnuts that putting your, we seem to be getting drier summers here. Comparing putting your urea on pre-plant or hilling. And the hilling, with the drier, putting it on hill, 2 or 3 weeks after planting and hilling in, with the drier summers, the nitrogen isn't getting down to the roots. And would that increase more nitrogen loss after harvest?
Well, it would increase the residual nitrogen that would be kept in, that would be there in the soil
Right.
after harvest. And then it would be dependent on
We always
the
get moisture